The silence was wrong. Kofi noticed it first as he walked toward his farm that morning. The absence of the usual sounds that marked the beginning of a harvest season. No birds sang in the trees. No insects buzzed through the air. Even the wind seemed to have abandoned Kwamebikrom, leaving behind a stillness that pressed against his skin like a warning. When he reached the edge of his yam field, his breath caught in his throat. Where rows of healthy green plants should have stood tall and proud, ready for harvest in just 3 weeks, there was nothing but devastation. The leaves had turned completely black, as if scorched by invisible fire. The stalks had collapsed inward, rotting from the inside out. The smell hit him next, not the earthy scent of rich soil, but something putrid and unnatural, like death itself had settled into the ground. Kofi knelt beside the nearest plant and touched one of the blackened leaves. It crumbled to ash between his fingers. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He stood and ran deeper into the field, hoping desperately that it was just one section, just a small area affected by some local blight. But everywhere he looked, the destruction was total. 3 months of careful work. 3 months of watering, weeding, praying over these crops. All of it gone. A shout echoed from the neighboring farm. Then another. And another. Within minutes, Kofi could see farmers emerging from their fields all across the valley, running toward the village center with panic carved into their faces. His wife, Alma, appeared at the edge of their property with their youngest child strapped to her back and their 2 older children clutching her skirts. "Kofi," her voice cracked with fear. "The vegetable garden behind the house. Everything is dead. The tomatoes, the peppers, even the bitter leaf. What's happening?" He had no answer for her. He grabbed her hand, and together they joined the stream of people rushing toward the village square. The talking drums had already begun their urgent rhythm by the time they arrived. The square beneath the great Irako tree was filling rapidly with every man, woman, and child in Kwamebikrom. Kofi had never seen so much fear in one place. Women were weeping openly. Men stood with clenched jaws, trying to appear strong while their eyes betrayed their terror. Children clung to their parents, sensing that something terrible had happened even if they didn't understand what. Elder Kruma stood on the meeting platform, his tall frame still commanding despite his 73 years. His face, usually calm and assured, was deeply troubled. Beside him stood Kwame, the elder's most trusted protege, the man everyone knew would one day lead Kwamebikrom when Elder Kruma could no longer serve. Kwame was 32, broad-shouldered and confident, with a face that naturally put people at ease. He had spent 15 years learning everything Elder Kruma could teach him about the old ways, the ceremonies, the ancient knowledge that kept their village connected to the land and the spirits. 5 years ago, the elder had entrusted Kwame with the village's most sacred responsibility, guardian of the blessed seeds. These seeds were Kwamebikrom's greatest treasure. They had been preserved and passed down for over 300 years, since the village's founding. The first settlers had been farmers who made a covenant with the earth spirits, and these seeds were the physical manifestation of that ancient agreement. Plant them each season alongside the regular crops, perform the proper rituals, and the land would never fail to provide. The harvests had been abundant every year under Kwame's stewardship. No one had ever questioned his devotion to this sacred duty. "Please, everyone, we must have order." Elder Kruma's voice boomed across the square, cutting through the rising chaos. The crowd settled into a tense, frightened silence. "I know what you have all seen," the elder continued. "I know the fear that grips your hearts. Every farm in Kwamebikrom has been affected. Every single crop has failed." A collective gasp went through the crowd, even though most had already suspected this truth. A man named Kojo pushed his way forward, his face twisted with desperation. "Elder, this isn't just crop failure. I've seen droughts. I've seen floods and pests. But this," his voice broke, "this is different. Healthy plants don't die overnight. They don't turn to rot and ash in a single night. This is not natural." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathering. An old woman named Afia stepped forward, leaning heavily on her walking stick. She had lived through more seasons than anyone except Elder Kruma himself. I have farmed this land for 62 years. My mother farmed it before me, and her mother before her. Never, never have I seen anything like this. The land has turned against us. Something has broken the covenant. Those words sent a chill through every person present. The covenant. The sacred agreement between their ancestors and the earth spirits that had sustained Kwamebikrom for generations. Could it be a curse? Someone called out from the back of the crowd. Did we offend the spirit somehow? Are we being punished? Elder Kruma raised his hands for silence. We cannot let fear drive us to wild conclusions. We must investigate this calmly and carefully. But Kofi could see that even the elder was shaken. This wasn't just about losing one season's harvest. Kwamebikrom was completely dependent on their farms. The closest market town was 2 days' walk away. They had some food in storage, but not enough to feed the entire village for more than a few weeks, maybe 2 months if they rationed carefully. If they couldn't plant new crops, if the land truly had been cursed or poisoned somehow, they would face starvation. What about the sacred seeds? A woman named Abina asked. Can we use them to replant? Can they heal the land? All eyes turned to Kwame. He stood tall beside Elder Kruma, his expression thoughtful and concerned. The sacred seeds are safe in the ceremonial hut, as always. But he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. We must first understand what has caused this devastation. If we plant the sacred seeds in poisoned soil, we risk losing them forever. They are our last protection. He's right, Elder Kruma agreed. We must be wise. Tomorrow at first light, I will gather the Council of Elders. We will examine the soil, consult the old texts, and seek guidance from the ancestors. Until then, no one touches their fields. No one attempts to replant. We must understand what we're facing before we act. The crowd began to disperse slowly, people breaking into small groups to whisper their fears and theories. Kofi held Ama close as they walked back toward their home, their children unusually quiet. Neither of them noticed Kwame standing alone on the platform after everyone had left, staring at his hands with an expression that, if anyone had been watching closely, looked almost like guilt. 3 days passed, and nothing changed except the depth of the village's despair. The Council of Elders had examined soil samples from every farm in Kwamebikrom. They had performed divination rituals and consulted the ancient agricultural texts preserved in the sacred hut. They had even sent runners to the neighboring village of Otomenkoma to ask if their farms had been similarly affected. The answer came back. Otomenkoma's crops were perfectly healthy. The devastation was isolated to Kwamebikrom alone. This news brought no comfort. If anything, it deepened the mystery and the fear. Kofi spent those 3 days watching his children's faces grow thinner. The village council had implemented strict rationing immediately. Each family received only half their normal food portions, and even that wouldn't last beyond 6 weeks. Alma had stopped eating her own portions entirely, secretly giving them to the children when she thought Kofi wasn't looking. He pretended not to notice because he was doing the same thing. On the 4th night, Kofi couldn't sleep. The weight of worry pressed down on his chest like stones. He rose quietly from his sleeping mat, careful not to wake Alma, and stepped outside into the cool darkness. The village was never truly silent at night. There were always sounds of life, of people moving about, of animals stirring. But tonight felt different, oppressive, as if the very air was holding its breath. He walked without direction, his feet carrying him along familiar paths between the compounds. Other people were awake too. He could see candlelight flickering in windows, could hear hushed conversations floating through doorways. Fear had stolen sleep from everyone. As Kofi passed near the sacred hut, the small, carefully maintained structure where the ceremonial items and blessed seeds were kept, he heard voices, low and urgent. He stopped, instinctively stepping into the shadow of a nearby tree. 2 figures stood near the entrance of the sacred hut, barely visible in the moonlight. Kofi recognized them immediately. Elder Kruma and Kwame. The elder's voice carried on the night air, sharp with an emotion Kofi had never heard from him before, suspicion. Checked 3 times now, Kwame. The seals on the storage vessels have been broken. Elder, I told you, I inspected them last week during the routine. The seals were intact last month when I personally verified them. Now they're broken. And the seeds. Elder Kruma's voice dropped lower, but Kofi could still make out the words. Some are missing. A long silence followed. That's impossible, Kwame finally said. No one has access to that hut except you and me. The door has been locked every single night. I check it myself. Yet the seeds are gone. Not all of them, but enough. Someone has been inside. Kofi's heart began to race. The sacred seeds missing? Could that be connected to the crop failure? He pressed himself flatter against the tree, hardly daring to breathe. We should inform the council, Kwame said. If someone has stolen from the sacred hut, if someone has violated the covenant, that could explain everything. The land would reject our crops if... I will inform the council when I'm ready. Elder Kruma interrupted, his tone sharp. First, I need to understand how this happened. You're certain you've noticed nothing unusual? No signs of intrusion. Nothing, Elder. I swear it on my ancestors. Another pause. When Elder Kruma spoke again, his voice was heavy with weariness. Go home, Kwame. We'll speak more tomorrow. Kofi waited in the shadows until both men had left, walking in opposite directions. His mind was spinning. Sacred seeds missing. The hut violated. Could someone in the village be responsible for the crop failure? But who would do such a thing? And why? He should have gone straight home. Should have returned to his sleeping mat and tried to rest. But instead, Kofi found himself walking toward the center of the village, where a few men still sat around a dying fire, too anxious to sleep. Kojo was there, along with Ya and Mensa, all farmers whose fields had been destroyed. Couldn't sleep either? Kojo asked as Kofi approached. Kofi sat down on one of the logs they'd arranged around the fire. Has anyone else noticed anything strange? Before the crops died, I mean. Anything unusual? The men exchanged glances. Strange how? Ya asked. I don't know. Just anything that didn't seem right. Mensa leaned forward, the firelight casting deep shadows across his worried face. Now that you mention it, I saw Kwame going toward the farms late one night, maybe 2 weeks ago. I was coming back from checking on my sick goat. Must have been well past midnight. He was carrying something, looked like a bag. Kwame goes to the farms all the time for ceremonies and blessings, Kojo said dismissively. That's his responsibility. At midnight, though? Mensa pressed. And when I called out to him, he seemed startled, like he didn't want to be seen. You're reading too much into it, Ya said. Kwame has served this village faithfully for 15 years. He would never. I'm not saying he would. Mensa backtracked quickly. I'm just saying it was strange, that's all. But Kofi's mind was racing now, connecting pieces that he didn't want to fit together. Kwame at the farms at midnight. The sacred seeds missing. The crops failing overnight in a way that defied all natural explanation. No, it couldn't be. Kwame was one of them. He had grown up in this village. His family had lived here for generations. He had dedicated his entire adult life to learning the old ways, to serving as Elder Kruma's protege. He would inherit the leadership of Kwamebikrom someday. Why would he sabotage his own future? But then Kofi remembered something else. About 3 months ago, traders had passed through the village, wealthy merchants from the coast. They had stayed for 2 days, and Kofi had seen Kwame deep in conversation with them on multiple occasions. At the time, he'd thought nothing of it. Now he wondered. The merchants who came through, Kofi said carefully. Did any of you talk to them? Did they say why they were here? They were heading inland, looking for exotic goods to trade in the coastal cities, Kojo replied. Spices, herbs, traditional medicines. They asked about our sacred seeds, actually. Wanted to know if we'd sell some. And Kofi's voice was tight. And, of course we said no. Those seeds aren't for sale. They're sacred. Elder Kruma told them firmly that they were not available at any price. Kojo paused. Why do you ask? Kofi shook his head. No reason. Just curious. But his heart was pounding now. Merchants wanting to buy the sacred seeds. Kwame seen at the farms at midnight. Seeds missing from the sacred hut. Crops mysteriously dying overnight. He stood abruptly. I need to go. Kofi, wait. But he was already walking away, his mind churning with a possibility so terrible he could hardly bear to think it. He needed to talk to Elder Kruma. Needed to share what he'd overheard and what he'd just learned. As he hurried through the dark village toward the elder's compound, Kofi didn't notice the figure watching him from the shadows. Kwame, standing motionless near his own home, his jaw clenched tight and his hands balled into fists. Elder Kruma listened in silence as Kofi spoke, his weathered face unreadable in the candlelight. They sat in the elder's private chamber, a small room filled with scrolls, ceremonial objects, and the accumulated wisdom of decades. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky. When Kofi finished sharing everything he'd overheard and learned, the elder remained quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. You have a good heart, Kofi, Elder Kruma finally said. And a careful mind. I've been wrestling with these same suspicions for 2 days now, afraid to give them voice. Then you think. I think we need proof before we accuse anyone of anything, the elder interrupted firmly. Especially someone who has served this village as faithfully as Kwame has. Suspicion is not evidence. But, he sighed deeply, I cannot ignore what I've discovered. Come with me. Elder Kruma led Kofi through the quiet village to the sacred hut. He produced a key from beneath his robes and unlocked the heavy wooden door. Inside, the air smelled of dried herbs and old earth. Ceremonial masks lined the walls. Clay vessels sat on carefully arranged shelves. The elder moved to a large sealed container in the corner, one of 3 that held the precious sacred seeds. He lifted the lid. Look, he said simply. Kofi peered inside. The container should have been filled nearly to the brim with seeds, enough for the ceremonial planting and to preserve for future generations. Instead, it was less than half full. The other 2 containers are the same, Elder Kruma said quietly. More than half our sacred seeds are gone, taken over time, bit by bit, so the theft wouldn't be immediately noticed. But only you and Kwame have keys, Kofi said. Only Kwame had a key. I gave him my spare 5 years ago, when I entrusted him with the guardian duties. I kept the original. The elder's voice was heavy with pain. I trusted him completely. It never occurred to me to verify his work, to check behind him. Why would I? He was like a son to me. The hurt in those words cut deeper than any anger could have. Could someone else have stolen his key? Made a copy? Kofi asked, still reluctant to believe the worst. I've considered that. But the timing, Kofi. The merchants came asking about our seeds 3 months ago. I refused them firmly, made it clear the seeds were sacred and would never be sold. But what if? He trailed off. What if someone offered Kwame enough money that he couldn't refuse? Kofi finished the thought. Elder Kruma's face seemed to age 10 years in that moment. Those coastal merchants deal in rare and exotic goods. Sacred seeds from an ancient agricultural covenant, seeds that supposedly hold spiritual power. They could sell those for a fortune to wealthy collectors, foreign traders, or other villages hoping to improve their own harvests. But why would Kwame need money? He has everything here. Respect, position, a future as our leader. His youngest brother has been sick for 2 years, Elder Kruma said quietly. Living in the capital city. The treatments from the European-trained doctors are expensive. I've heard Kwame has been sending money when he can, but it's never enough. A man desperate to save his family might convince himself that taking a few seeds wouldn't hurt anyone, that there were plenty left, that the village would never even notice. Kofi felt sick. But the crops, did he know that stealing the seeds would cause this? That's what haunts me most, the elder said. The sacred seeds aren't just seeds, they're the physical manifestation of our covenant with the earth spirits. Removing them without proper ceremony, selling them for profit, treating them as mere commodities instead of sacred trusts, yes, I believe that could break the covenant. The land would reject our crops. The spirits would withdraw their blessing. Did he know that would happen? I don't know. Perhaps he thought he was being careful enough that it wouldn't matter. Perhaps he convinced himself the old stories were just superstition. Or perhaps... Elder Kruma's voice broke slightly. Perhaps he knew and did it anyway, thinking he could solve his family's problems before anyone discovered what he'd done. They stood in silence, surrounded by the sacred objects that had protected and guided Kwamebikrom for generations. All of it felt tainted now, violated by betrayal. What do we do? Kofi asked. We call a village assembly, Elder Kruma said, his voice regaining its strength. Today, we lay out what we know, and we give Kwame a chance to speak. If he confesses, if he tells us where the seeds have gone and helps us retrieve them, perhaps we can still repair the covenant. Perhaps the land will forgive us. And if he doesn't confess? The elder's eyes were hard. Then we will have to decide what justice looks like for a betrayal this deep. By midday, every person in Kwamebikrom had gathered in the village square once again. But this time, the atmosphere was different. Word had spread, carefully, quietly, that Elder Kruma had discovered something important about the crop failure. Hope mixed with dread on people's faces. Kofi stood near the back of the crowd with Alma and their children. He watched Kwame arrive, watched the way the man smiled and greeted people, seemingly at ease. Either Kwame was innocent, or he was a better actor than Kofi had ever imagined. Elder Kruma stood on the platform, but he didn't call for order immediately. Instead, he simply waited until the natural silence of anticipation fell over the gathering. My people, he began, his voice carrying across the square. I have served as your elder for 32 years. In all that time, I have tried to lead with wisdom, with fairness, and with love for every person in this village. What I must do today is the hardest thing I've ever done. The crowd shifted uneasily. I know why our crops have failed, Elder Kruma continued. I know why the land is turned against us. Our covenant with the earth spirits has been broken, not by accident, not by some natural disaster, but by deliberate theft and betrayal. Gasps rippled through the assembly. The sacred seeds, the treasure passed down to us through 300 years, the physical symbol of our covenant, have been stolen. More than half of them are gone, taken from the sacred hut over a period of months. The gasps turned to cries of shock and anger. People began shouting questions, demanding to know who could have done such a thing. Elder Kruma raised his hand for silence. When the crowd settled, he turned to look directly at Kwame. Only 2 people have keys to the sacred hut, myself and my protege, Kwame. Every eye in the village turned to Kwame. He stood frozen, his face going pale. Elder Kruma, he said, his voice remarkably steady. Surely you're not suggesting that I... 3 months ago, wealthy merchants came to our village asking to buy our sacred seeds, the elder continued, his gaze never leaving Kwame's face. I refused them, but I have since learned that you were seen speaking with them privately, multiple times, and that shortly after they left, you were seen at the farms late at night, acting as though you didn't want to be observed. That proves nothing, Kwame said, but his voice had lost its confidence. You're right. It proves nothing. Elder Kruma's voice was gentle now, almost pleading. So, I'm asking you directly, before all these people who love you, who have trusted you, who have welcomed you as one of their own, Kwame, did you steal the sacred seeds? The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children seemed to sense that something momentous was happening. Kwame looked around at the faces of his village, people he had grown up with, people he had served, people who had believed in him. His eyes lingered on Elder Kruma's face, seeing the pain there, the desperate hope that somehow this was all a terrible misunderstanding. When Kwame finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Yes. The single word fell like a stone into still water, sending shockwaves through the entire assembly. For a moment, no one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Then the silence shattered into chaos. People shouting, crying out in anger and disbelief, pushing forward toward the platform. Kwame stood motionless in the center of the storm, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of shame. Elder Kruma raised both hands, his voice booming with an authority that commanded instant obedience. Silence. The crowd slowly settled, though the anger in the air remained thick and volatile. "Let him speak," the elder said, his own voice tight with emotion. "Let us hear the full truth before we decide what comes next." Kwame lifted his head, and Kofi was shocked to see tears streaming down the man's face. This wasn't the confident, assured protege everyone had known. This was someone breaking apart under the weight of what he'd done. "My brother," Kwame began, his voice cracking. "My youngest brother, Kojo. He's been sick for 2 years. Living in Accra, trying to get treatment from the European doctors there. They said they could help him, but the medicines, the procedures, they cost more money than I could ever earn in a lifetime of farming." "So you sold our sacred seeds?" someone shouted from the crowd. "You destroyed all of us to save one person? I didn't think it would hurt anyone." Kwame's voice rose desperately. "There were so many seeds. I thought if I just took a portion, if I was careful, no one would notice. The merchants offered me more money than I'd ever seen. Enough to pay for all of Kojo's treatment, enough to save his life. You stole from us," Afia, the old woman, said, her voice shaking with fury. "You violated the sacred trust. You broke the covenant that has protected this village for 300 years. "I know," Kwame said, his voice breaking completely. "I know what I've done. When the crops started dying, when I realized what my theft had caused, I wanted to die myself. I kept thinking maybe it was coincidence, maybe it was something else, but deep down I knew. I had brought this destruction on all of you. Where are the seeds?" Elder Kruma asked, his voice heavy. "Can we get them back?" Kwame shook his head miserably. "The merchants took them and left the region weeks ago. They said they had buyers lined up, collectors in Europe who pay fortunes for exotic specimens, other villages hoping to improve their own harvests. The seeds could be anywhere by now. On ships crossing the ocean, planted in foreign soil, divided among a dozen different buyers." A woman named Abina stepped forward, holding her thin, hungry child. "My daughter is starving because of you. All our children are starving. You were supposed to protect us, and instead you destroyed us for money." "I was trying to save my brother's life," Kwame shouted back, his grief turning to desperate anger. "What would you have done? If it was your child dying, your family suffering, what would you have done?" "Not betrayed an entire village," Abina said coldly. "Never that." Kofi felt Alma's hand grip his arm tightly. He looked down at his own children, their faces thin from rationing, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. He thought about the farms that would produce nothing this season, about the starvation that was coming, about the possibility that they might have to abandon Kwamebikrom entirely, scattering to other villages as refugees, begging for charity. All of it because one man had chosen his own family over the community that had raised him, trusted him, and given him honor. "I made a terrible mistake," Kwame said, his voice dropping to a broken whisper. "I convinced myself it wouldn't matter, that I was taking so little, that the old stories about the covenant were just superstition. But I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong, and now everyone is suffering because of my greed and my weakness." "What about your brother?" someone asked. "Did you save him at least?" Kwame's face crumpled. "He died 3 weeks ago, the day before the crops failed. All that money, all that betrayal, and I was still too late. The European medicines didn't work. He died anyway, and I destroyed everything for nothing." The silence that followed this revelation was different. Not the silence of rage, but of tragedy. Even in their anger, people could recognize the terrible irony of what had happened. Kwame had sacrificed everything and gained nothing. His brother was dead, his honor was destroyed, and he had brought ruin to the only home he'd ever known. Elder Kruma looked older than Kofi had ever seen him. "The law of our ancestors is clear," he said quietly. "Theft of sacred objects carries the penalty of permanent exile. You will be cast out of Kwamebikrom. You will never again be welcomed in this village or any village that honors the old covenants." You will be declared dead to your family, your name will be struck from our records, and no one will speak of you except as a warning to future generations." Kwame nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. "I accept the judgment. But before I go—" He looked up at the elder with desperate hope in his eyes. "Is there any way to repair what I've broken? Any ceremony, any offering that might restore the covenant and save the village?" Elder Kruma was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant as he searched through decades of accumulated knowledge. "The old texts speak of restoration," he finally said. "When a covenant is broken, it can sometimes be repaired through three things: confession of the wrong, which you have given us; punishment of the wrongdoer, which we are enacting; and sacrifice. The community must give up something precious to show the spirits that they still honor the covenant, even when one of their own has violated it." "What kind of sacrifice?" Kofi found himself asking. "We still have some sacred seeds left," the elder said slowly. "Not enough to maintain the full blessing, but enough to plant a small ceremonial garden. If we plant those remaining seeds, not to harvest them, but as an offering to the earth spirits, a demonstration that we value the covenant more than our own survival, it might be enough to show our sincerity." "But those are our last seeds," Kojo protested. "If we plant them as an offering, we'll have nothing left. No way to ever restore the full blessing, even if the spirits forgive us." "That's what makes it a real sacrifice," Elder Kruma said. "We give up our last protection, our last safety, and put our trust completely in the mercy of the spirits and the strength of the community. We demonstrate that we understand the true meaning of the covenant. It was never about hoarding sacred objects for ourselves. It was about trust, community, and honoring what has been given to us." The murmuring in the crowd was uncertain, fearful. What the elder proposed was terrifying. They would be giving up their last hope, gambling everything on the possibility of spiritual forgiveness. But Alma surprised Kofi by speaking up, her voice clear and strong. "I say we do it. We can't live in Kwamebikrom without the land's blessing anyway. Our farms are dead. We're facing starvation. What do we really have to lose? At least this way, we show that we're different from the one who betrayed us. We show that we understand what the covenant truly means." One by one, other voices joined hers. Slowly, fearfully, but with growing conviction, the people of Kwamebikrom agreed. Elder Kruma nodded, tears now flowing freely down his own face. "Then we will perform the ceremony tonight, under the full moon. And Kwame." He looked at his former protege with a mixture of love and grief that broke Kofi's heart. "You will leave before sunrise tomorrow." "I'm sorry. I loved you like a son. But you can never come home again." Kwame nodded, unable to speak. That night, the entire village gathered at the ceremonial fields. Elder Kruma planted the last of the sacred seeds himself, speaking the old words of covenant and asking the earth spirits for forgiveness and mercy. Everyone participated, even the children, even those too sick from hunger to stand easily. As they worked, something strange began to happen. The oppressive silence that had hung over the village since the crops died began to lift. Birds started singing again. A gentle breeze blew through the valley. And though it might have been imagination, Kofi could have sworn he felt the earth beneath his feet grow warmer, more welcoming. When the ceremony ended and people began walking back to their homes, they discovered something miraculous. The small vegetable gardens near their houses, gardens that had died along with everything else, had sprouted tiny green shoots. New life, emerging from what everyone had thought was dead soil. It wasn't much. It wouldn't feed the village through the coming season. But it was a sign. The spirits had heard them. The covenant was being restored. 3 months later, Kofi stood in his fields watching the new crops grow. They had planted using regular seeds traded from neighboring villages, and the land had accepted them. The harvest wouldn't be as abundant as in previous years. It would take time to fully rebuild the blessing, but they would survive. Kwame had left as commanded, and no one had heard from him since. Elder Kruma never spoke his name, but sometimes Kofi saw the old man staring toward the road that led out of the village, a look of profound sadness on his face. The story of what happened became a teaching tale. passed down to children as a warning. Not just about the consequences of theft and betrayal, but about something deeper, that true wealth isn't measured in money or personal gain. That the things we preserve for the community, trust, honor, shared blessings, are always more valuable than what we might grab for ourselves. That greed-driven betrayal doesn't just hurt the person betrayed, it poisons everything it touches, destroying not just the present, but the future. And that some things, once broken, can be repaired, but never quite the same way they were before. The scar remains, a reminder of what was lost and what it cost to restore what could be saved. Kofi's youngest child tugged at his sleeve. "Papa, will the big harvest come back? Like in the old stories?" Kofi knelt down and looked into his daughter's eyes. "Maybe someday, if we're faithful, if we remember what we learned, if we never forget that what we hold and trust for each other is always more important than what we keep for ourselves." The child nodded solemnly, not quite understanding but sensing the weight of the lesson. And in the distance, the drums began to beat, not the urgent rhythms of crisis, but the steady, hopeful rhythm of a village that had survived betrayal and was learning to trust again.